afternoon to all of you. Thanks so much for joining us today. There is a lot going on in the Turlock Subbasin, and we're going to be talking about some of the projects and management actions, as well as implementation and support activities that are going to be part of the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. And the clock is ticking. The team is going to have to get this plan pulled together and put out to DWR at the start of next year. So everything is in full mode right now to get that done. My name is Lisa Butler. I'm going to be moderating your session for today. We've got some great panelists for you. I'm going to turn this over to Herb if you want to go ahead and do some quick self-introduction and let us know what's going to be happening today, Herb.
Sure. Welcome, everybody. So my name is Herb Smart, and I am a member of the Technical Advisory Committee. I've been working on a lot of the outreach planning and things like that, and so I welcome everybody to the call. We have some panelists on the call that are here to answer questions as we move along, and we also have one panelist, Mike Tita, who will be presenting on chapters 8 and 9 for the bulk of our discussion today. And so just by in mentioning namesake, you already heard from Lisa. We have her colleague Marisa is also helping facilitate. And then as far as the technical team that's on the call today to answer questions from the Subbasin representatives, we have Debbie Montalbano, Karen Morgan, Lacey McBride, and then, of course, I mentioned Mike Tita, and then also Sarah Wolf. We've all been working on a lot of various planning aspects of the GSP. And so we welcome you. We look forward to your questions. We look forward to your comments. And I'll just kind of pause there and give it back over to Lisa and or Mike.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and jump in real quickly. We are very fortunate. We do have some folks on the line with us today. So if you wouldn't mind, we'd love to hear your voice as well. I think I have a Kelly. Kelly, would you like to introduce yourself? And she's got us on mute. While she's doing that, I'm going to have Meredith Parkin introduce herself.
Hi, this is Meredith Parkin with Environmental Science Associates.
Meredith, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Lisa.
Yeah, Rachel?
Hi there, I'm Rachel Carnes. I'm also with Environmental Science Associates.
Super. And I think we have Rhett.
Hi, I'm Rhett Calkins, a farmer, well owner, ag well and domestic well owner.
Great, thank you for being here. And let's see, we've heard from Sarah. So Rhett?
Yeah, that was Rhett.
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. And Kelly is the last one. And still got us on mute. So
sorry about that. This is Kelly Sterl. I'm also with ESA.
Great. Okay. So you're here to see what those other consultants have been up to then?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. It's great to have you. Rhett, thank you so much for joining us today. Rhett, was there anything in particular you were hoping to hear more about?
I've missed a couple meetings, and so I'm just interested in hearing the presentation and being able to ask questions if I have any. And so it's really nice to have the whole panel here. I guess I feel special. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so what's going to happen is Herb's going to do a quick overview of SGMA and the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. We'll give you all, just if you have any questions about that, most of you are very experienced at this point, so probably not. Then we're going to let Mike just do a deep dive into what's happening with chapters 8 and 9. Once again, we'll have lots of time for anybody to ask questions. Also, we do use the chat. Feel free, if you have a question, you don't want to forget it, just drop it into the chat and we'll be able to swing back to it. I think, Rhett, do you need any briefing on how Zoom works? Are you good?
I got it. Yeah, I'm pretty good at it. If I have any problems, I'll raise a hand or put something in the chat, or I'll unmute myself and ask questions.
Perfect. Well, I think we can just jump in then. We normally have a little slide about how to use Zoom, but I think we can skip that. Okay, Herb, take it away, please.
Okay, well, I am going to quickly pull up, if I don't know if it's Mike or if it's Marisa who has the current screen shared, but if you could pull that down, then I will share my screen and just do a quick little overview of, thank you, perfect. Do a quick little overview of the website. Not so much the website, but I've been asked to kind of provide a little bit of context setting. So I'm just going to do that here for about 2 minutes. So you're seeing here our Turlock Groundwater website. It's the hub of everything that we have related to outreach and information and the GSP. And I guess the 30,000 foot description is, what context are in. Well, we're here to comply with SGMA, right? And which is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. I know how Lisa hates acronyms, so that's why I'm mentioning it there. But it's kind of almost ubiquitous now for most of us. But so we're here to comply with that law. The first thing we had to do was form GSAs in the subbasin, and we did that before 2017. And before June of 2017, we have 2 GSAs. That would be there'd be the West Turlock Subbasin Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and then the East Turlock Subbasin GSA. And so here, what I'm going to show you now is trying to get into some context setting. I'm going to go into our What Are We Doing page, which has really, what are we doing? We're developing a groundwater sustainability plan. And you're going to hear a lot about chapters 8 and 9 today in a few minutes from Mike. But this is a timeline we've been working off of throughout the discussion, and there have been a couple other different versions as well. But we are, if I could hover over where we're at, we are right here in the GSP review, soon to be in January, hopefully GSP adoption part of the plan. And so we are developing that GSP to cover the entire subbasin. We're looking to turn that in before the due date of January 31st of next year. And of course, that plan is supposed to get us through 2042 as far as sustainably managing the subbasin. And so that is the rough context of where we're at. One other thing I want to mention here on the site is that we have an events page, trying to make sense of all the meetings and everything. We have a calendar page. And so in order to see kind of what meetings are coming up, we have a lot of them. There's sometimes multiple meetings a week, definitely multiple meetings a year, multiple meetings a month at least. And so here is our events page. You see they're listed. Some meeting days have multiple meetings. Some just have one, indicated by the picture there. And then you could even thumb through and go into December, and then January, for example, we have a public hearing to potentially adopt the GSP January 6th of next year. So that's one way to view that. Also on the homepage of our site, you can just scroll down and you see the upcoming stakeholder input opportunities, which pulls directly from that calendar. And here you see the discussion we are in right now with these groundwater office hours. So that's just a quick overview. Wanted to set some context. Happy to answer questions toward the end of the meeting as well. And you'll hear from me one more time as we talk more about how to comment on the plan and how to acquire the plan contents. So that's it for me from now.
Thanks, Herb. And I'll just check back. Anybody in the audience, any questions, anything you'd like to know about what you heard Herb talking about?
This is Rhett. I have a question. The last couple meetings I missed. I think they were scheduled as special meetings, which probably means there was not a lot of notice. I'm just curious if that's what's going on. I know you guys are up against the clock and probably scheduling meetings as soon as possible to let people know, but I'm just curious why I missed. I don't know. I'm not on the calendar every day, and I watch my emails for notices, but I've missed a couple of meetings.
Yeah. So Herb, I'm wondering, there are different kinds of meetings. I'm wondering which ones he might be referencing. What are your thoughts?
My guess is he's right. There've been some special meetings that have occurred. Usually we get those out, but we try and aim to get them out definitely before the 24 hours needed prior to the meeting, but as soon as possible, even with more time before that. A lot of them have been special meetings of late. We do have regular meetings of the TAC and also of the GSA boards as well. But a lot of the ones lately have been special meetings, and we usually send those out. We notify almost 99% of the time through our mail list. I know I send those out. And then the rest of the time, sometimes based on timing, they don't go out. But the ones for the more recent meetings of the past 2 weeks or so have all been part of individually or lumped in to a group newsletter email with stuff. And we always update the site first with the information. Then we'll usually send an email, and then I'll usually try and follow that up on the social media channels as well. So I'll have to look into that and make sure your email is still active on that, Rhett, because I want to make sure you do get them, but I'm not necessarily sure why they may have not made their way into your inbox.
Yeah, Herb, on Monday there was 2 special meetings, and so I kind of look at the calendar and try and see what's coming up, but those probably weren't on the calendar the prior week. They probably popped up late on Friday or Saturday or Sunday, or whatever the minimum notice is. That's probably why I missed. This presentation today pretty much covers what was talked about on Monday. So
it's good to know though that that happened. That's something that Herb can follow up on. And so Herb, do you think were the special meetings of the TAC or of the GSAs?
So looking here, I could totally see, I'm seeing here on the calendar, I'm looking on my other screen, that those meetings, what we had more recently was we had a special meeting of the East Turlock Subbasin GSA. I think we noticed that on Friday. That was on Monday of this week that meeting was held. And then we had a joint special meeting of the 2 GSA boards in the evening on the 15th. And I know that was noticed the previous week as well. And a lot of times what will happen is we'll know the meeting is going to be held, so I'll put it up on the site, but we don't necessarily have the documentation, the agenda and the agenda packet, up to, because people are still preparing those documents. And so I'll usually do, sometimes I'll put the agenda up at the same time that I put it up on the site in terms of saying, hey, hold that date for the meeting, but other times they go up at the same time. And so I'll just have to look into all that. And I'll also make sure too, Rhett, what I'll do is as we notice meetings, I might try and find a way to just personally, send you a note as well to make sure that you're getting all of that so that you could participate in those.
So
go ahead, Deb.
Yeah, sorry.
Debbie,
I just wanted to.
Debbie, introduce yourself.
Hi, Rhett. This is Debbie with the TID. We used to work together. He's a really great guy. So Rhett, I just wanted to let you know that we are doing a lot of these meetings as special meetings, just because we're trying to find dates that work for both GSAs particularly. And so we got a lot of people to try to navigate. So I apologize that it's not like on a specific time. It's also joint meetings. And so the 2 different GSAs meet at different dates and different times. And so we can't have a standard meeting that works for both GSAs. So we will try and make sure we have the meeting dates on the calendar. And then as Herb has indicated, we'll try to get that information out to you as soon as we can. And also we've been working around for November anyway, the holidays. So some of the TAC meetings got moved as well. And there is a TAC meeting this afternoon. And I wanted to make sure that you knew about that one as well.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. I appreciate it. I see that, and I will attend that. I appreciate you guys are, working with a lot of entities and with the deadline, and so it's all kind of getting crunched. But the idea to reach out to me is a good one. I kind of feel like I've got some time invested in this thing over the last year, and we're down to the real good stuff that I want to know about. In total, how does the plan come out? And I'll be submitting written comments. But so I think we're almost done. So we're not going to have this issue much longer, other than kind of buttoning things up now. So I guess I don't have much to complain about. But if there are meetings coming up that get put on the calendar. It would be really nice to get an email. And I have been getting emails, you know, I've been getting the standard email that goes out to people that are on the list, and maybe I missed it or whatever. And it's not like this is the only thing I'm doing. I got a lot of stuff going on. So
right.
We
and,
understand.
and you all have the same, a lot of stuff going on too. So anyway, thank you.
Well, great. Well, once again, thank you for raising it, and it's good to know. Did you want to add something else, Debbie?
Oh, I was just going to make a pitch that our next joint GSA meeting is December 15th. And then we have scheduled a hearing date for January 6th. And so those should be, I think, on the calendar. We don't have the details yet on, you know, agendas and what have you, but those will be there as well. So you could put it maybe on your calendar if you're interested.
That's great. Thank you. I do want to note that I did have somebody log in, and you are most welcome to talk if you'd like to. I'm going to set it up so you can do that. Just let me know. This is for caller at the 209, and the last numbers are 1274. So if you'd like to talk, just kind of let me know, and we'll make sure to put you in the queue. So thank you for joining us. All right, I think we can jump into the presentation. Mike, are you ready to roll?
Let me unmute. I think Marisa is going to drive the slide deck.
She is, yeah. And would you mind introducing yourself so everyone?
Yeah, I'm Mike Tietze. I'm the coordinator for the East Turlock Subbasin GSA. And let me just start by saying I'm relatively new to this group. I started with East Turlock in late August, and these two chapters are the action chapters. This is what we're going to actually do, not just the framework of how we're regulating ourselves. So I'm very excited to present that to you, and also excited about the fact that this has been very much a collaborative effort, and you know, we've had to talk about some hard things and work them out, and I just have been really pleased with the courtesy and professionalism with which we've worked together. So next slide. So what we're going to cover first is understanding modeling, because a model is an important tool for figuring out what our projects are going to do for us and how we're going to implement management actions. And in that context, also talk about the sustainable yield of the groundwater basin. And then Chapter 8, projects and management actions, and Chapter 9 on implementation and support activities. This kind of brings the whole thing together into what we're going to do. So application of models for sustainability analyses, that's been something that's been done for a long time. Models are a great tool. They are a representation, mathematical representation, in this case, of a physical system that's based on various different kinds of data. This is a numerical model, so it's a mathematical representation. And, you know, models are very useful for understanding conditions and predicting potential outcomes. They're one of our more versatile and important tools in hydrogeology and in groundwater planning. They do have inherent limitations and uncertainties. And as long as those are understood and the model is applied appropriately, they're a great tool. So in this particular case, the model works best to predict water budget conditions and changes in groundwater levels that are induced by projects or various actions. The model is not as good at predicting absolute groundwater levels. So for example, we might be able to predict that a project might change groundwater levels at a location by 5 feet or 10 feet, but we may not be able to predict that it will be, you know, 392 feet above mean sea level. Next slide. So sustainable yield, that's defined as the maximum quantity of water. And it's calculated over a base period, so over a number of years that represent a variety of different hydrologic conditions, both wet and dry period. And it's an estimate of what can be withdrawn annually from the groundwater supply without causing what's called an undesirable result. And for those of you that have been around the Sigma parlance for a while, click. Go ahead. Okay. These are the 6 different undesirable results that we need to manage to avoid. And the only one that doesn't apply in our case is seawater intrusion, but we have declining groundwater levels, reduction in groundwater storage. We always want to have enough in storage to do what we need to do. Water quality degradation, land subsidence that can be caused by pumping, and surface water depletion when we have streams or other resources that are connected to groundwater. Next slide. So the estimated long-term average sustainable yield of the Turlock Subbasin is 311,000 acre feet. That was determined by modeling. It's based on what is currently our best available current data and knowledge of the subbasin. It is an estimate, and it is a long-term average estimate. So for on a given year, that number might go up or down, but what we're interested to is managing a basin to the long-term average. And that number will probably be refined as time goes along and we learn more about the basin. Next slide. So this shows the bars coming down from the top, precipitation. Each bar is a year, and coming from the bottom is amount of pumping. And you can see that when precipitation is low, pumping increases. That's very normal for a basin, especially like ours that relies on conjunctive use, especially on the west side and TID that's been providing surface water in a way that helps us to conserve our groundwater resources over time. And you can see that this is our historical condition to the left of the black mark, going from 1992 to 2015 is represented there. Green is ag pumping. The goldenrod is urban pumping. And then the forecast 50-year period is based on historical hydrology that's repeated to represent variability and average conditions going forward. The key thing here is that the pumping is above that red sustainable yield line. And that's by an average of about by an average of up to about 39% for the basin as a whole. That's the current estimate. Next slide. So let's talk about Chapter 8 first. Next slide, please. So the way that we meet the subbasin sustainability goals is through projects and management actions, or PMAs. And Sigma requires every GSP to include a description of the projects and management actions that we've determined will achieve the sustainability goal of the basin, so to avoid those undesirable results. And projects are defined as they're physically constructed, they're capital projects, structural features, and management actions are non-structural programs or policies. Both of them are designed to work together to bring us to sustainability over that 20-year implementation period. Next slide. So for each project, the regulations require that various different things be described so that the projects are fully recognized in terms of their impacts, implementability, effectiveness, and so forth. And I'm not going to read them all off, but these are all talked about for each of the projects and management actions in Chapter 8. Next slide. So this lists our Group 1 and Group 2 projects. Now, Group 1 and Group 2 projects are either in place, that's Group 1, or currently planned and expected to be implemented in the next few years. And these include 5 urban water supply projects and 3 agricultural water supply projects in the West Turlock Subbasin and 3 agricultural water supply projects in the East Turlock Subbasin. So the Regional Surface Water Supply Project for Ceres and Turlock, I think we're all aware of that's going to retire some pumping and allow groundwater levels to recover. That's called in lieu recharge. And then there's various other ones, some storm basins and some other pumping and storage enhancement projects to increase water use efficiency. The projects are roughly located here where they're marked on the map. Now, the actual projects may be larger than where the dots are located. For example, Project 6 and Project 9 are both agricultural recharge projects, and they actually extend in a broad band all along that boundary between the West Turlock and the East Turlock Subbasin. Next slide. Group 3 projects are conceptual at this time. So, it's important that we identify all kinds of projects at various different points in the pathway to development and implementation. These are more conceptual, and so we're not able to say for sure exactly how they will be implemented, but they're being actively investigated. Some are further along than others. But they're not at a point where we can quantify them or say exactly when they will be implemented. But they're described in more detail in the plan. And again, there's primarily agricultural projects here on both the west side and the east side, split about equally. 12 through 17 are on the west side of the subbasin, and 18 through 23 are on the east side. And those are the locations. They're spread out at various different locations where the opportunities exist, primarily either for increased efficiency, potential water use for recharge, or potential water supply for in lieu recharge to get people off of groundwater and onto surface water. Next slide. So in order to evaluate the effectiveness of these projects and how far they will take us, the Group 1 and Group 2 projects were modeled. And that was done in 4 different scenarios. And in scenario 1, you can see the X's are next to the 5 urban and municipal projects. And so those were evaluated by themselves. And then in scenario 2, the West Turlock Subbasin agricultural projects were added. In scenario number 3, the East Turlock Subbasin projects were added to the urban and municipal projects. And then in scenario number 4, they were all modeled together. And then there's a line on the bottom here, which is not really a project, but it captures what needs to be done by additional projects and management actions to make up whatever deficit is left over after scenario 4 is implemented. And I see Rhett has his hand up, so I'll just pause there for a question.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. On the agricultural recharge projects on the west and the east side, that's Project 6 and Project 9. Are those new projects to any discussion? I haven't heard those before. I mean, I've heard of on-farm recharge, but not specifically as indicated on the map in those locations. And there's 2 of them. One of them is in the east side and one of them is on the west side. And they look very near to the Turlock High Line. Maybe that's where they're pulling water from.
That is exactly right. And I can speak to the East Turlock project. Maybe it'd be best to have Debbie speak to the West Turlock project. The East Turlock project will start with parcels that have historically received water when it's available for parcels outside of the service area of TID. And those projects would then continue to be served with water during the irrigation season for in lieu recharge, and during the winter season when extra flood flows are available for direct recharge. Debbie?
Yes, thank you, Mike, and Rhett, thanks for your question. Just for clarification, the on-farm recharge project for the east side, I think, is focused on just those years that there's like above normal water. So the wet and above normal water years, consistent with what has historically occurred, and just those gates that have had access in the past, at least right now. There's a Group 3 project and additional concepts of looking further but that's what was modeled, I believe, in the analysis that Mike's talking about. And then for the TID on-farm recharge project, it's something that we've been talking about for a little while, and it's a further development of the concept. And you'll notice on the map that it's kind of focused in the area where there have historically been some domestic well issues. And so for this first kind of approach towards on-farm recharge within the TID, the modeling assumed that it would be focused in that area. Over time, we may choose to add additional areas as well. But that's where we kind of focused the initial approach from a modeling perspective, is looking at just those areas. And then again, it would be during the irrigation season, as well as in the off season during those wet and above normal years, just trying to get additional water into the ground using the existing facilities and access. And so we would be developing a program to work with the growers to see what options there may be, whether it be fallow land or whether it be areas that may have switched to groundwater for convenience, and maybe we can move to encouraging the use of surface water at certain times. And it's going to be a project that gets developed, and you'll hear more about it. It hasn't been finalized yet in any way, but there's assumptions with respect to the amounts of water we might be able to do in those areas that are included in the modeling, and that'll evolve as we move forward.
Okay, yeah, I'm interested because groundwater levels since 2007 have gone down 20 feet underneath my property, and that's not due to my pumping, and that's a lot of water. So that water, I guess, is gone. I mean, we don't know where it went. I think, we can guess, but those are just guesses. So I'm interested in those projects. I'm interested in this area where we had many, many wells go dry, including mine at one point in time. I'm interested in getting that water level back up. And so I'm really interested in recharge. And in lieu of pumping, there are a number of farmers right next to me, right nearby, that pump instead of get surface water for various reasons. You can talk to any farmer, and we all farm differently, and there's different reasons. So I like what you're saying. It's everything together is kind of a project. We got to do recharge, and we got to encourage people to take surface water in lieu of pumping groundwater and all that. So anyway, appreciate the information. Thank you.
Yeah, so Red, the concept, oh, sorry, Lisa. The concept for the West is to really kind of build a project. And so I think it'll start kind of small and pull, if you're, interested in it, you might be a candidate for starting, and demonstrating how one can do those types of things as well. Because we're going to be, needing to work with growers who are interested to kind of demonstrate how the process could work. Because it is a new thing for us, as you know. Yeah. But I do think it has lots of potential.
So I do want to take a minute just to back up just a teeny bit. So, because right now Mike's talking about modeling. And so what's really important about this slide, Mike, please correct me if I don't have this right, but what's important about this slide is you're kind of showing, here's our assumptions about where water's coming from and how we're going to get to making sure we're in good shape. And here's kind of how we ran the numbers. Then I heard Debbie talking about, as a second part of this is in the implementation, there's going to be management projects and things like that, that it will include these things, but also could include some other things. So Mike, did I get that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Lisa. So, we can think of this as tools in our toolbox. And currently we're modeling these first 11 tools. And there's other tools that we're looking at, you know, they're in the catalog. We're looking at buying them and putting them into our toolbox, but they're not there yet. And so what that scenario 5 does for us is, you know, what kind of tools are we going to need to get to make up whatever deficit above the sustainable yield needs to still be reduced, that net deficit that exists after we implement these projects. So these are the, you know, this is our first round of projects. There'll be other projects, they'll warm up over time. You'll hear a lot about those in the coming years. And the way that this is evaluated is using the model that's been built for the project and evaluating the project effects against the sustainable management criteria that have been set in the wells. So there have been groundwater elevations set in all of our, what we call our representative monitoring sites. Our designated wells all are tagged with a minimum threshold and a measurable objective that we want to reach, by which we define sustainable extraction. And that objective has been set to address those sustainability indicators that you see right there. They're all monitored using groundwater levels. So we're going to predict it using the model, then we're going to go out in the field and we're going to monitor it to see what it actually does. Next slide. So understanding with that, in terms of the modeling, there's two different kinds of pumping demand that we model, and net pumping reduction that we model. The surface water and groundwater users in the, I don't know what color that is, that's like a bluish color, that is a conjunctive use area. And that area is assumed not to have to increase their net groundwater demand after the implementation of projects. The green areas are reliant on groundwater only, and that includes some of the cities, which are already subject to various different demand reduction efforts that are captured in the plan, and then the East Turlock Subbasin, which is located there in green. Those are non-district as well as district areas reliant on groundwater. Next slide. So this shows the modeled groundwater storage. So the red line in this case is our target. That's the 2015 groundwater storage. And the blue line is the baseline. That's the existing condition. And with implementation of the Group 1 and Group 2 projects, which are all supply side recharge and in lieu recharge projects, we see that that storage line goes up, but it still dips down below the 2015 groundwater storage. And when we implement the scenario 5, which is sufficient demand reduction to make up for the deficit, we see that that line stays above the red line. And the way that we would make that up is through a combination of Group 3 projects, to the extent we can implement them, and demand reduction management actions. Next slide. So this shows predicted well hydrographs, groundwater levels predicted in certain wells. And you can see up in the upper right-hand corner where those wells are located. And these are all going to be pairs of wells on these particular slides. So the lowest line on each graph is the baseline. That's without any actions or projects. And then there's scenario 4, which is with all the Group 1 and Group 2 projects, and scenario 5, that's with 25% additional demand reduction. And what you see on the left-hand side is that you dip down below the dashed orange line, which is your minimum threshold that defines your undesirable result. And you do sometimes dip down below the measurable objective, which is where you want to be most of the time. You know, that's what you're managing to leave yourself some level of buffer before you start getting into trouble. So, and then on the graph on the right-hand side, you see that it regularly dips down below the orange line. But then the sustainable scenario stays above the green line, which is our measurable objective. And so that we know that that's where we want to be. And these are just two examples. There's more examples shown in the chapter. Next slide. Interconnected surface water depletion is managed to a little bit higher standard. It's managed to not the 2015 water levels, but the 2014 water levels along Merced River. And that's where these two wells are shown. And that shows a similar pattern that we're currently dipping down below the minimum threshold at least some of the time. With implementation of projects, we get part of the way there. And with the sustainable management scenario, we get all of the way there. And on the right-hand side, you see dots on the minimum threshold line. That's where the groundwater levels dip down below the minimum threshold line. And an undesirable result is if that occurs for 3 years in a row for a certain number of wells. So in this case, if you run the statistics on it, you know, we've met the objective with a 25% net demand reduction as forecast by the model. Next slide. So the findings are Group 1 and Group 2 projects are going to have significant benefits. You can see those hydrograph lines rising up. And we know now that additional projects or demand management are needed to meet sustainability goals. It is likely, I'll just say this, that it will be a combination of additional projects and demand reduction in East Turlock Subbasin, you know, speaking for ourselves. The preliminary model estimate is approximately 25%. That's an early planning estimate. That's to be revised as we go. It could be lower than that, could be higher than that. The net groundwater demand reduction can be partially offset by additional projects. And so we're very motivated to implement projects to the extent that we can.
So this is where RET comes in, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Next slide. Let's talk a little bit about implementation and uncertainty. Uncertainty we have to live with. As you're implementing a groundwater management scheme or a project, what you don't know is as important as what you do know. You have to plan for both. So uncertainty decreases over time. And so we have to anticipate and plan on the best available data at any point in time. And that improves, so we adjust our management strategy as time goes on, and we monitor conditions and address data gaps. And then we react to current conditions. If we have an undesirable result, or if we have a certain trigger that's hit, we have to react to it. And then we also adapt to new information. And what the graph on the left shows is how uncertainty decreases over time. We're at time 0 on the lower left-hand corner there. We have different kinds of uncertainty right now. Some of our data is uncertain. Our model has some inherent uncertainties. It's just a mathematical representation. Our sustainable management criteria, our minimum thresholds, measurable objectives, did we set them right? Do they need to be dialed in better? And then future climate is always an uncertainty, but you'll see that the climate band remains about the same thickness. At least if I used my finger paints correctly, it did. And you can see that the cumulative uncertainty decreases over time. So I mean, there's probably other contributors to that uncertainty, but the idea is that we're uncertain now, so we need to be monitoring and addressing data gaps to collect more data so that we can do this better for the long haul. Next slide. So that's where adaptive management comes in. And it starts with developing modeling tools. And later, you know, as we do more than one cycle, we refine those modeling tools. We use those tools to analyze the available data. We set sustainable management. Later, we come back and we refine them. We implement the group 1 or 2 projects. When we come back, we add group 3 projects, and we expand, if we can, the group 1 and 2 projects as needed and as possible. Next, we monitor the basin responses. We monitor the basin responses and trends, and we address data gaps as we find them, as we need to. And then we implement the management actions as needed to address compliance issues. So if we drop below those minimum thresholds, and to meet sustainability goals. Whatever's lacking in projects, we need to make up for with management actions. And when we get done with that, we start over again. And so you go through these cycles all the time in, with constant, hopefully constant improvement, learning how to do things better. Next slide. So our management actions consist, and these may be implemented by one or by both GSAs. I can tell you that East Turlock Subbasin GSA is planning to implement the demand reduction strategies and the pumping management framework to the maximum extent that we can. So the demand reduction strategies are more administrative, voluntary conservation and or land fallowing. We can help to facilitate that through making information available, coordination among various different parties that want to participate. If fallowing is part of your plan, figuring out how to do that in a way that maximizes your flexibility for the future and your conservation of water. Those kinds of things can be facilitated through. Conservation practices are expanding conservation practices, both urban and agricultural type practices, into areas where they're not currently applied. The pumping management framework would start with a groundwater extraction reporting program. It would continue into groundwater allocation and pumping management, so pumping reduction on a systematic basis. Considering charging a groundwater extraction fee for unsustainable pumping, that the proceeds could then be used for projects. And then groundwater pumping credit markets and trading programs to help provide growers with maximum flexibility and offset some of the pain and allow you the ability to pump more when you need to, and to get credit for pumping less when you can. And then lastly, we also have a domestic well mitigation program that we've implemented because domestic wells are often the go-to water source, especially for disadvantaged communities. So we wanted to give special consideration to make sure that the GSP addresses those groundwater users. Next slide. So this slide, we can kind of toggle back and forth. This is pumping above the sustainable yield. You've seen that before. And go to the next slide and toggle back. Go back. So you can see that with demand reduction, go to the next slide. We go below the long-term average sustainable yield. So it's okay to exceed it in some years, as long as on average you don't. It's the long-term average that you manage to in groundwater. Next slide. So this slide's a little bit busy, but it shows the framework for how adaptive management would work. It's a conceptual slide. The vertical scale is % of average sustainable extraction. And 100% you'll see is in blue. That's our sustainable pumping at any particular area. The red is in excess of that. It's unsustainable pumping, and that's what we're trying to phase out over time. The horizontal blue lines are projects, which is in essence offset our unsustainable pumping. And the red is pumping reduction, which also offsets our unsustainable pumping. And the idea here would be that when projects start to be implemented, that red bar starts to choke out. And at the first 5-year review, that first brown dashed line, we develop a pumping reduction plan that starts to be implemented between year 5 and year 10. That's the first increment. We'll gather more data as we go along and be smarter in terms of how much pumping reduction we need to do and how many additional projects and what their yield is going to be. but the aim will be to completely phase out the unsustainable pumping by year 15. So this is, again, this is conceptual. There's a lot of things that it doesn't take into consideration, but it shows the concept of how this is achieved over time. Next slide. This slide simply shows that if you're able to get more project yield, that the pumping reduction, not only does the red bar choke out more quickly, which is desirable, but the pumping reduction that's necessary is less. And then in order to facilitate all of these things, there would be credits, trading, carryover pumping to help provide flexibility and incentives for people to reach that sustainable yield. And on the red pumping, we may consider a program to assess fees. Next slide. So this just briefly shows the domestic well mitigation program. It's a pretty busy slide. I'm not going to go through it all, but it's kind of a red light, yellow light, a green light kind of approach. If the subbasin's in compliance with minimum thresholds, then there's probably not much risk of wells going dry. Those were set at 2015 levels throughout the basin. If there's exceedances and some evidence of wells going dry, then there's certain things that we would start to implement. And if it's definitely exceeded and wells are going dry as a result, then that triggers evaluation and implementation of some proactive actions to help address that in the long term, in the short term and in the long term. Next slide. Okay, on to chapter 9. And this is just very brief. It's just basically one slide. Next slide. So this shows all the various different activities that are necessary. It kind of repackages some of them and how they're implemented in terms of projects and monitoring and reporting and administration of the plan. So we're up to 11 implementation support activities. There is still a couple of placeholders in this chapter to be filled, so you're aware. Where is it? The water allocation framework is something that we're actively negotiating now. That's going to be going in front of the joint board meeting on the 15th for adoption as an errata to this plan. So stay tuned for that. And then the estimated costs and schedule are also being refined, and those will also be added in a similar time frame. So this just basically gives you an overview of the implementation plan. Next slide. And that is it.
Questions. And we've kept the line open for people to ask questions all along. So we do want to offer again, if there's anyone that would like to jump in to please do so. I know we have a phone caller. We'd be more than happy to hear from you if you'd like to make a comment. And so I'm going to ask the audience a question. Meredith, I'm going to ask you a question. Well, you've been, yeah. So I imagine you've been looking at a lot of the plans. What is your sense of this one relative to some of the other plans you've been looking at?
Yeah, and Mike, you did such a good job on this presentation. It was just very interesting, great graphics. And just to give a little context, I'm actually presenting at the 2 o'clock meeting on the program environmental impact report for the GSP. So lots of connectivity as far as our interest in understanding the projects that are going to be implemented, so we can describe the range of impacts and mitigation measures that may come along with those in the environmental impact report. So yeah, this is very interesting, and other GSPs, similar kind of some type of approach, but yeah, again, really great presentation. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Meredith. Red, did you have something?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions. Yeah, and let's start. The first one is domestic well mitigation. I'm kind of curious how that will work. What I would like to see, not for me necessarily. I'm advantaged. I have all the advantages. I'm involved in the meetings. I have connections at TID. I have direct phone numbers to several of you. But so I'm kind of advantaged, and so I can kind of see where things might be going, although I have more questions on that too. I have a domestic well, and I know approximately the depth it's at, and I do know exactly the depth to water from the top. I don't know exactly what level we set that thing at back in 2007. I also have an ag well, and I know the level there, and I know where that's set. But the idea would be that the GSP has some wording in there that says we're going to let individuals know, and you might focus on the area that we know the water gets drawn down. We're going to let domestic well owners know as best we can, maybe in newspapers or on Twitter and Facebook and all your other avenues that you have made available now. Notice there that, hey, we're going to attempt to tell you guys where that ground level might end up being throughout the next agricultural pumping season. We might end up 5 feet lower. I'm just making up numbers. All the areas are different. It would be hard to tell people exactly your well and your area is going to be at this level. And so maybe you should call the pumper, get on the calendar, and get your, if you can, get your pump lowered. And if you can't, then we're going to have to start talking about other mitigation, like bring a tank in and truck in some water, so you don't have to move out of your house at the last second because you didn't know that all of a sudden you're dry. And we've pumped pretty good because it's been dry the last 2 years. And this year, we don't know what it's going to look like, but we haven't had rain for a little while here. So we might guess, if we look at history, this year might be dry as well, if you just look at probabilities. So anyway, just, mitigation is one thing. It's like, well, when the person's house is out of water, that's kind of like he has to deal with it. He and she and the family and everybody else has to deal with that right now in the middle of everything else that they're doing. That kind of stops your life. So could we warn people? Could we tell them, look, it's pretty low in your area between Denair and Houston, and next year it's probably going to go down X number of feet. So maybe you should make an appointment with your pump guy and have him do a specific recommendation on your domestic well, so you're not caught in a surprise when your house is dry. And that's an emergency for everybody. I mean,
thank you. That sounds like a really nice suggestion to be thinking about some kind of an early warning system, right? Am I understanding that right? Just a way to get out to people, particularly that people are going to be impacted, and some way to kind of give them some heads up and let them know, there's going to be a problem. Did I get that right?
Yeah, as an example, I called my pump guy at the start of the irrigation season this year, 2021. So February or March, and I got on a list. I didn't know I was on a list, but he made a list of everybody that was calling. He called me back 2 months later. Hey, what can I do for you? I'm like, well, it's kind of late now.
We've been hearing that all over. I've been working in about 24 subbasins, and I've been hearing that quite a bit too. I need to do a quick time check because I do know there's an additional meeting. We're kind of at the end of our session. I just want to get a real quick pulse read from our panelists. I know one of you already had to drop off. So is there can I grab another 5 minutes if Rhett has another question or comment? Is that, you guys got time for that?
I'm okay for now.
Okay, great. Well, Rhett, I think we can take another 5 minutes then. I want to be mindful if they'll run into a 2 o'clock meeting. It looks like some of the attendees had to jump off too. But did you have more that you wanted to ask or make a comment on?
Can I just maybe respond real
yes, absolutely.
Because it's domestic wells are important and they're complicated. And so what we've done with the domestic well mitigation program is laid out a framework for development of the actual program during GSP implementation. And that would be developed, with input from the public, by the technical advisory committees. And it may be done individually, but it probably, that particular one I could envision might be done jointly by West Turlock and East Turlock. So it sets forward standards according to which a program would be implemented. And then we have talked about, Herb, I think, has talked quite a bit about the, public outreach and education. And we have talked about domestic well owners potentially being a part of that. So it's a very welcome comment. It's a tough issue. Sometimes with domestic wells, you don't know what's causing them to fail. And we can't take responsibility for things that are not related to our particular area of management, but nonetheless, some of us, especially us that are on domestic wells and have had gone, right? It's no fun to get up in the morning and not be able to shower or cook, or so I've experienced that.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So Rhett, it looks like I've got about 3 minutes left. I'm going to check real quick for the phone caller. If the phone caller has any comments or questions, I just want to make sure you have a chance to jump in. And then if not, I'm going to give the last 3 minutes of this meeting to Rhett. So Rhett, take it away.
Okay, the ramp down of the pumping, it looks like you, in fact, you stated it's kind of planned or modeled out over a 15-year to get us to the sustainable area. So it's a real slow ramp. In the meantime, we'll be exceeding the minimum threshold that was set at the 2015 levels, kind of by design, because it's to be expected. I think right now we're below 2015 where I sit. So levels are already below minimum threshold here. And it usually goes down by quite a bit when it goes down here. It's not like other areas more west. I'm more east in between Houston and Denair. So when water levels dip, they dip fast. They also recover faster. So I guess I would critique that we need to act with more urgency than 15 years to become sustainable, because we're going to exceed. I guess what protects us is that minimum threshold. So we start bouncing on that, then action has to take place. So anyway, I guess we're time's up. Our time's up.
Well, you know what? Thank you. That's such a thoughtful comment. Mike, did you want to just make a comment, or Debbie?
It's definitely, a comment that we're always thinking about. I would say, read chapter 6 and chapter 8 together and get a sense, you'll get a better sense for how the framework works, because we'll actually be managing to interim targets. Those interim targets are to raise our groundwater levels over time. And, we want to be proactive enough to where we don't make things impossible for ourselves, but we want to be slow enough so that we can live to see it happen. And so I'm sorry, I'm saying this kind of facetiously, but there's always the balance between you want urgency, you want it quickly, but you want the process itself to be sustainable. So that's the balance that we're.
Yeah, and I want to get a second for Debbie to respond as well. And then just real quickly, Rhett, do you know how to comment, how to get on the website, how to add additional info? Because Herb does have a little piece on that if you would like that information.
I'm good. I've got all that. I'm well aware how to do all that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, very good. And phone caller, if that's something you would like us to cover, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and let Debbie do the last thoughts. Okay, go ahead, Debbie.
Okay, so I would reiterate what Mike said with respect to reading chapter 8, which talks about the projects and management actions, and as well as chapter 6 that talks about the sustainable management criteria and the minimum thresholds and measurable objectives for the various areas within the district. And so you'll see what it's like in your area. And then there is an additional well that's going to be installed in your area, and we'll evaluate the monitoring network once all the additional wells that are already planned and budgeted for are installed, and we have some additional data. So the monitoring network will evolve over time as well. And then lastly, for the domestic wells, one of the challenges that we have is that we don't really know where they all are. And so the domestic well program includes maybe doing some surveys and some other things to gather data about where the wells are and where things are set and that sort of thing, because it's difficult to manage to something we don't have much information on. And so you've been really great about engaging, but there's a lot of well owners out there that we don't know have wells or where theirs are screened or any of that. And so it's a bit of a challenge, but we did try and set the minimum thresholds to a level that would that was a known. So in 2015, there were a lot of wells that were perhaps impacted, whether they were old wells or whether it was the water levels that were impacting them. We're not sure, but then there was a lot of new wells installed and in those same general areas. And so our hope is that a lot of those wells were already addressed. And so if we manage at the 2015 levels for the minimum threshold, then hopefully that'll, help protect the wells. It's just a matter of, those interim milestones in the interim before we get there. But I do believe if you look at the the sustainable management criteria and the interim milestones and how those are set, it doesn't take 15 years to get above the 2015 level. It takes those 15 years to get to the measurable objectives, which are a little above the minimum milestones. So recognize that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Debbie. I appreciate it. I appreciate all your time, everybody's time. Thank you.
Thank you. So Rat, before you go, I'm going to make an ask to you, which is, as you can see, if you're a participant, this is the absolute best meeting you could go to. It's like personal attention. So if you could let your friends and family know that they really should be getting to these meetings, because there's a lot of great information that's being shared, and it's really worth people's time. And I'm not sure people, a lot of times they see a government meeting and they're like, oh, right, like that. But if you could let people know that this team in particular is working really hard and they're happy to answer questions, and they were just bringing their A game to these sessions. So that's my ask back to you.
I am doing my best to encourage people.
Okay.
Yeah. Good job. Yeah.
No, I'm sure you strike me as someone who's pretty credible in your community. So that's a huge service you could do for this team. I want to just check with any of the other team members if you had a last thought to give you a chance to do that before we sign off.
Comment on the GSP, and I'm looking forward to Rhett's comments. Tell people to comment, show them where the site is and what's available there, and then just keep mentioning, I'll keep mentioning every time I have a forum, that January 6th, 2022 public hearing, because I don't want people that are interested to know to not know that that's coming.
Thank you so much. All right. I see the rest of the team members are probably needing to run to their next meeting. So I'm going to let you all go. Thank you again for the very nice session today. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.